YouTube. Okay. How's everyone been? Good. Good, good. All right. Before we get right to material, we're going to be talking a lot about the Jewish calendar today. And so I can definitely screen share, but if you want to follow along on your computer, or if you want to download a Jewish calendar onto your phone or computer or iPad or whatever, hebcal.com or hebcal is great, really easy to do. So you can customize calendar settings for whatever you want. So if I just want to know the major holidays of Judaism, then I will get rid of all of these things. If I want to know the weekly Torah portion, I'll add that. We always want diaspora holiday schedule unless you move to Israel. And Sephardic transliteration, and then you can create a calendar that will download onto your computer. But just follow along today. To just follow along today, you'll want to go to the Jewish calendar for 2022, and we'll start looking at the calendar that way. Oops. All right, hello, Mara. Okay, I'd like to start today by just asking from last week, was there a denomination or movement of Judaism that stuck out to you as something that made sense? Or even if you weren't here last week, one that has made sense. Anna?
Yeah, so for me, I've actually, so sorry, I just heard my voice echoing on yours. So for me, it kind of, I've actually been kind of thinking about this question for a while when I'm thinking about, what denomination I most associate with, because I've spent most of my life thinking I associated most with like the most reform, most liberal, most uh unadherent to rules form of like ethic Judaism that there was. Um, and I've been beginning to question that a little bit recently, over the last few years. Like when I've been streaming services, I've felt more connected to conservative services than I have to reform services, because a lot of times, and maybe these are just the services that I've seen, and I'm sure it varies synagogue by synagogue. Um, I felt that some of the reform or humanistic services I've seen have been like almost a little bit too removed from the tradition, and a little bit too removed from what makes it a Jewish service as opposed to an ethics lecture, if that makes sense. Um, so it did kind of stick out to me that the conservative movement is a little bit more of a balance, and I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also, especially going to services during the pandemic, it's nice to have a service that is the same thing every time. Like you know what to expect, but you might learn something different every time, or you might notice something different every time. Yeah. How about Bryson? I know you've had experience in different movements. Do you have one that sticks out to you?
Most excuse me, most definitely. I will say that what does stick out to me most is conservative Judaism. And I think a lot of what you said last class also sort of resonated with me. It was like, sticking to tradition, but also having the understanding that, like women can take leadership roles, and women can be rabbis, women can lead services, things like that. So I think really what stuck out to me about conservative Judaism is the fact that it does still adhere and follow tradition and halacha, but also realizes that, there are certain things that the community needs to support itself that don't necessarily stick hard fast with tradition.
Right. Did any stick out to you, Emma?
It's hard to say because I realize how little I know, so I'm just kind of just going through it. It's all everyone's been very friendly and very interesting, points of discussion. So yeah, I can only say I know I can't do Orthodox for sure. That's all I can sort of say at this point.
Why not?
It would probably be the kosher and the Shabbat. The very strict interpretation would just be too difficult for me with like the walking and the light switch rule.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know, Curtis, you weren't here last week, but just in reading and learning, are there any movements that stick out to you as making sense?
I think the conservative movement, I mean, obviously I attend your synagogue and I've kind of fallen in there more than any of the other movements just based on my knowledge of them. I really kind of like what Bryson said. I really appreciate that tradition aspect in the history, but as well as, hey, if it makes sense to this day, it's not just a closed book interpretation. So I really appreciate that piece of it.
Yeah, I like that. Well, I'm glad to hear all those answers because we're a conservative synagogue. But I've spent a lot of time in a whole bunch of different movements. I don't know if I talked about this last time, but grew up Reform. The rabbi who convinced me to become a rabbi was Reconstructionist, and spent a lot of time in Orthodoxy in Israel, and realized that I kind of needed somewhere egalitarian. So I think I agree that there's so much about conservative Judaism that's both accessible and challenging. It pushes us. So Mara says, well, I recognize the, shall we say, practicality of Reform Judaism, recognizing the children of only one Jewish parent. I do like the matrilineal line that conservative Judaism recognizes. That's interesting. For some, that's the hardest part, or one of the hardest parts about conservative Judaism, is that idea that if somebody has grown up Jewish their whole lives, and their father is Jewish, but their mother is not, then halachically, technically, they're not Jewish. They wouldn't count in a minyan. Even if practically they are Jewish, they wouldn't count in a prayer quorum of 10 people in a conservative movement. Now, there's lots of times when this pops up, and for me, what I would normally do is I would advise, first of all, I welcome anybody in services all the time, but for somebody who's grown up in that movement, I would just basically advise to go to the mikveh or to go to the ritual bath to just do that ritual of immersion, answer some questions from a Beit Din, because no Beit Din, no group of 3 rabbis is going to turn away somebody who's lived their whole life Jewishly. And then it's the conversion process, but we don't see it as a conversion process. It's kind of an halachic affirmation process. Great. So I just wanted to make sure we covered that, because I think it's important to, after learning all this about the movements, just to figure out where we stand. And that might change a lot over time. We might be comfortable in some spaces for some things more than others. I'm sad I couldn't get somebody from Orthodoxy to speak this week, but one thing that I really appreciate about Orthodoxy is that when people live in Orthodox community, it's very much a culture of everything is about Judaism. That every meal has blessings before and afterwards. That every Shabbat you're expecting to go have a meal at somebody's house, and on Friday night and Saturday morning and Saturday afternoon, and the entire year surrounds that Jewish calendar. I think it's a beautiful thing that we don't get as much in other movements. I think in bigger Jewish communities, that might be conservative, you might see more of that. But there's more of an assumption of really keeping those days as sacred, right? They don't leave shul and go out to lunch, right? Or go to a baseball game. They'll leave shul and they'll celebrate more Shabbat with other people. So I think that's one thing that I really appreciate about Orthodoxy. Although again, in any community, it's different. I want to shift a little bit. We talked a little bit about Judaism as culture or ethnicity, and we touched a little bit on that idea that that there are Jews everywhere and have been Jews everywhere historically. Judaism is both a culture and a religion. So as an example, my parents are both atheists, and they made sure both of their kids had a bar and bat mitzvah and sent us to Hebrew school and sent us to Jewish camp and really strongly identify as Jewish. They donate to Jewish organizations, but want nothing to do with God and prayer, right? Just want to make sure that their kids have access to it and that they identify as Jewish. So it's really a cultural thing in my family. And I know that my family's not the only one. So what are some of the distinctive features that define a culture? We've got cuisine, dress, language, music, custom, dance. Anything else that's not in here that might define a culture?
Food.
Food, that's a big one.
Oh, cuisine. My bad. It's right there.
That's a big one.
You could no, books is part of language.
Yeah.
Art, like
art. I love
but
that.
you could argue that's all kind of dance and music is just.
Yeah, but cuisine's a big one. Like that's how my family celebrates, right? My family thinks about Judaism in terms of my bubby, my grandmother's kugel, or matzo ball soup, or her brisket, right? That's when we think about Judaism and our family. That's kind of the first thing to come up. But there are, in my family, and in a lot of Jewish American families, there's this idea of Jewish culture as Ashkenazi, right? We throw around a lot of Yiddish words, but really around the world there are so many different Jewish ethnicities. So around the world, matzo ball soup is not a thing that every Jewish person enjoys, right? Not every Jewish person identifies when someone on TV says oy vey, right? I do, because my family immigrated from the Pale of Settlement in late 19th century, early 20th century. But around the world, there's so many different cultures. Yes, matzo ball soup is delicious, should be universally enjoyed, and there are delicious versions of matzo ball soup in lots of different cultures. There's a big dumpling thing. Like every different culture has its different dumpling alternative, especially in soup. But so Ashkenazi Jews are descendants of people who came from the Pale of Settlement, who came from either Eastern Europe or Germany, France, originally. And for us, when you go to synagogue, normally it's the seats are frontal, right? So the bima, the place where the rabbi stands, is a little bit up, and the congregation is down on the floor. That's changing a lot. So in newer synagogues, it's being built more in a round so that everyone can see each other. But in older Ashkenazi synagogues, you've got that front-facing idea. And Ashkenazi Jews historically spoke Yiddish, which is kind of a combination of German, little bit of Russian, Polish, and Hebrew. It uses Hebrew letters, but if you understand German, you'd understand Yiddish pretty well. Sephardi Jews are those who came from Spain, and I want to make sure I get this right, from the Mediterranean region, from Spain, Southern Europe, Israel, North Africa. They spoke Ladino. So Ladino is a language, it's basically Hebraicized Spanish, right? So if you know how to read Hebrew and you know Spanish, then you'd be able to understand Ladino. And they have some different customs. So, for example, their synagogues tend to be in the round, or have historically been in the round. They They have a history of mysticism that's different from Ashkenazi Jewish mysticism, and they don't tend to have the same history of denominations. So when we talk about Jewish denominations, it's very much historically been an Ashkenazi Jewish conversation. Right? In Sephardi communities, services will look a lot like Orthodox most of the time, and different people within the community will practice differently at home. But there are little things that might differentiate Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews. So, for example, traditionally, Ashkenazi Jews on Passover both wouldn't eat bread and wouldn't eat things that look like bread. So, like rice or barley or peas, green beans, things like that, corn, things that we might associate with bread. Whereas Sephardic Jews, where they lived, rice was a staple crop, right? You couldn't live without rice. So that's what they ate. So for Sephardic Jews, it's just the species of grain that they won't eat on Passover. That also is changing, right? Whereas now more Ashkenazi Jews are also eating those extra grains as well on Passover, and it's just bread. It's just the 5 species of biblical grains that we don't eat. Mizrahi Jews are those that are Judeo-Arabic and Farsi, so from the Arabian Peninsula and Persia. Lots of similar traditions to Sephardim. And Persian Jewish communities have very specific cultures that are very specific customs that are really a sense of pride. They give them a lot of sense of pride, especially if you go to a Persian Jewish wedding. It's going to look different from any Jewish wedding you've been to before. That's Mizrahi Jews. And then we have Jews in Sub-Saharan Africa. Right now, we've got a community of Jews in Uganda who have kind of adopted the conservative movement, which is really fascinating. But there are other communities of Jews as well. South Africa has a big, or used to have a big Jewish community as well. There's a small community in India, and there's a small community in China as well, and of course all around the world. But now, as you might have known from the way that I was talking about things changing, a lot of these customs have merged with one another, and especially now, as more people are marrying people who aren't Jewish, or are marrying, or are in interfaith marriages, Ashkenazi Sephardi, or Sephardi Mizrahi, or a Ugandan Jew with an Indian Jew, right? Those cultures are meshing with one another, and in a few years, like I said last year, I'm really interested to see how we're going to see those amalgamations of cultures, and what Jewish culture is going to look like in just a few years, because that's changing all the time. Questions about any of this? Great. So let's move on to Jewish holidays. Before we look at all of these sources, what are all the Jewish holidays that we can remember?
Everyone knows about Hanukkah.
Hanukkah, great. Hanukkah is a Jewish holiday. What are some others?
Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah, nice. Yom Kippur.
Purim. Purim.
Purim, Shavuot.
Passover.
Nice. Passover. What's the holiday where we live in huts for a long time?
Sukkot.
Sukkot, nice. Great. There's a really sad holiday over the summer. This is a little bit obscure, but it's a big deal.
Yom HaShoah.
That's
No.
also a sad holiday, but that's also a holiday, yeah. Yom HaShoah is Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Okay. Also sad.
Yeah, also sad. But at a different time of year than International Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Yes.
Yeah. So these are all different holidays with all different flavors, why, I mean, this might seem like an obvious question or a strange question, but why have holidays?
Well, it ensures everyone, so that you can say if everyone is off on this day to do the, and it just ensures that everyone is off on a certain day. I mean, I thought, yeah, very pragmatic reason.
Yeah, it's communal, right? To make sure that everybody's off on a certain day, that nobody's bothering anyone else while they're celebrating, and that we can celebrate together. So it's a communal point in time for sure.
I mean, to recognize milestones in, Jewish history.
Nice. So remembrance. Communal memory.
I suppose it also helps kind of mark the year out, a little like where you are in the year. So I suppose people also just, used it to work out, what they need to do, when the crop needs to come in, because you kind of like go by whenever the holidays were.
Yes. Keep track of the year, and also agriculture. Also celebrating, we had a good harvest, or even though we didn't have a good harvest, let's celebrate anyway, or please God give us a good harvest.
Or let's eat all the food before it goes off as well. Like,
yes, let's eat all the food before it goes bad. Absolutely. And that historically, biblically, is really where a lot of our holidays come from.
Are any of them like mitzvahs or commandments? Maybe not like
that's
the
another reason why
10.
I have a holiday, because God said so.
Right.
Yes, they're definitely mitzvahs. Fantastic. Some of them are mitzvahs from the Torah, and some of them are things that rabbis called mitzvot later, because it was instituted later. Right? Like Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, obviously was not prescribed in the Torah, but we still see it as a mitzvah to acknowledge it today. Absolutely. If you have your textbook or just want to look on the screen, these are a few more reasons, a few well-worded reasons why we might celebrate holidays, especially Jewish holidays. I'll invite you just for a few minutes to look at these words of Rabbi Kushner, Rabbi Strassfield, and Rabbi Greenberg. See if one of them sticks out to you. If there's something that you appreciate out of these three definitions of why a holiday. Why holidays? Give us 3 minutes or so. Any other reasons we got from these rabbis for how or why to celebrate holidays?
Well, it's just kind of like reminiscing almost.
Hmm.
The one by Harold Kushner, because he's talking about couples, recapture the way they felt. So it was sort of like I suppose if you, especially you've done the holiday since you were a child, you kind of every time you go back, it's reliving all the childhood associations as well with the holiday and what you learned then.
That's nostalgic. Love that. Mara says, I like the idea of the holidays affirming the life that is here and now. Right? We both look at the history of it, but we also celebrate what we've got right now.
Yeah, I really the idea that it's like restaging the great events of the Jewish history that validate the hope, because it's like about the here and now, as Mara said, but it's also about like connecting to the history and like appreciating the history and like remembering specific instances, celebrating specific events or instances, just like being mindful of history while living in the now.
Mm-hmm. Right? We always hear that statement, never forget, but really, there's so much we can learn from that history, and every time we celebrate, we're celebrating in a new year at a different time, and so it's relevant in a different way. I think I got too from Rabbi Strassfeld this idea of taking stock of where we are right now. It gives us an excuse to stop and focus on a different mood, right? On Passover, we focus on freedom as a basic mood. On Purim, we focus on silliness and craziness, right? Because we all have got that wild and crazy side. On Hanukkah, we focus on light when we're in the darkness, because it's wintertime and it's cold and dark, right? And so on each of these holidays, we focus on a different topic or a different mood or a different value, and see how that's present both in the past and in the now as well. I'd like to look at the Jewish calendar now. And if you have the textbook or if you have the chapter, this wheel is really, really helpful looking at the Jewish year. It is not, the Jewish calendar is not exactly parallel to the Gregorian calendar. The Jewish calendar is now a lunisolar calendar. So the Gregorian calendar is strictly a solar calendar. I don't know what the calendar is called, but the calendar used in Islam is a lunar calendar. So, for example, you might notice if you have Muslim friends that Ramadan shows up at a different time each year. Right? Sometimes it can show up in December and sometimes it can show up in June. With the Jewish calendar, we are a lunar calendar, but once our calendar gets a little bit on a different track, our calendar resets. So I'll explain that resetting when we get there, but let's start month by month. And I think I'm going to stay on this page. It might be the easiest way to look at it. If we start out at the new year, we start out in the month of Tishrei. Tishrei is either September or October. Sometimes it's like last year, it's really early September. This year, I believe it's going to be beginning of October, I think. But Tishrei is September, October, and in Tishrei we start out our year with a whole bunch of different holidays. Our new year is Rosh Hashanah. Yom Kippur is our fast day and our day of repentance. Sukkot is our festival of huts, and I promise I'll go farther into these holidays in a second, just kind of going through the calendar right now. Shmini Atzeret is the end of Sukkot, and it's this time that we talked about agriculture. We're praying for rain because we're going into the winter season, and in Israel, the winter season means rain, or else we won't get crops, right? So Shmini Atzeret is pray for rain. Simchat Torah is is celebrating the giving of the Torah, and it's also kind of a send-off of this whole holiday season because we don't have holidays for quite a bit longer. So it's kind of a big celebration, and our Torah reading for the year starts over. Our Torah reading starts every year at Simchat Torah, back at Genesis. And then we read every weekend of the year until we get to the end of Deuteronomy and then shift back to Genesis. It's a whole circle of the year. After Tishrei, we have Khashvan, which is October, November. It's often called Mar Khashvan. Mar means bitter. So it's often called bitter Khashvan because there are no holidays. Kislev is November, December. Kislev is when Hanukkah starts, and Hanukkah goes between the end of Kislev, beginning of Tevet. So that's November and December. Because this is the darkest point of the year, this is our festival of light. And as I taught in the synagogue a few months ago, we're not the only people to have this festival of light at this exact time of year. Right? Our Hanukkah starts on the 25th of Kislev, which might sound familiar. It's 25th of the winter month, right? Close to solstice as well, right? So all of these different traditions, we're one of them, have these holidays that celebrate light at the time when the world is at its darkest. So this is into Tevet. There are some minor fast days here as well. Shavuot has Tu B'Shvat, which is the birthday of the trees. We are right now in Adar, and Adar is where things get funky. So Adar is February, March. And you might notice that right now, we're right at the beginning of February. Adar actually started at the very end of January this year. Every few years, the Jewish holidays start to get earlier and earlier and earlier in the Gregorian calendar until this year, Rosh Hashanah started the first week of September, and all of the rabbis in the Western world went crazy trying to prepare in time because it seemed like Rosh Hashanah was early, right? Or it seemed like Hanukkah was early. Or a few years ago, we had Thanksgiving, right? Thanksgiving and Hanukkah at the same time, and it seemed like Hanukkah was so early. So what was happening there is that because we've got this lunar calendar, each year, it seems like the holidays are getting earlier and earlier in the Gregorian calendar. So what we do to fix that is every few years, there's a specific pattern, but every few years, we have an extra month of Adar. So right now, we're in the first month of Adar, and then we're going to get a second month of Adar. Actually, today was Rosh Chodesh Adar, the first day of Adar. Right, first day of Adar, but it was the first day of Adar. So it really started on Sunday night. But it's right at the beginning of the month of the first month of Adar. We're going to get a second month of Adar, and that's when Purim is going to happen. So right now we're just in a leap month, and our holidays are going to be back to normal on the Gregorian calendar, right? Or a little bit later than we're used to on the Gregorian calendar. In a few years, we'll have an extra month of Adar again. So in Adar Bet, or just plain Adar in a non-leap year, we have the holiday of Purim, which is a celebration of the book of Esther. In Nisan, which is March, April, we have Pesach, which is Passover, and Yom HaShoah, which is Holocaust Remembrance Day. There is a typo. I don't know in the new book if it's still a typo. It's still a typo in the new book.
Where is it?
Why didn't they change it? Okay. So Ivar is supposed to be Iyar with a Y, but it's ER, and in ER we have a whole bunch of different smaller holidays. We have Yom Hazikaron, which is Israeli Remembrance Day. It's basically it's Israeli Memorial Day. We're remembering all of the fallen soldiers in Israel, and then it goes directly into Yom HaAtzmaut, which is Israeli Independence Day. So we have a day of mourning, and if you're in Israel, there are ceremonies everywhere because everyone knows somebody. Because the country is so small, everybody has served in the military. Everyone knows somebody either who's a fallen soldier or who has been killed in some sort of an attack. And so they have these memorial services at all of the schools in the area, at all of the synagogues in the area. And there's one moment during the day, both on Yom Hazikaron and Yom HaShoah, where there's a siren that plays throughout the country, and everyone gets out of their cars or stops what they're doing and stands to remember those we've lost. And it's an interesting mood shift because we go right from Yom HaZikaron, right from Memorial Day, into Israeli Independence Day. It's like our 4th of July. And in that same month, we've got Lag BaOmer. Now, to explain Lag BaOmer, there's a little bit of context before that. So between Passover and Shavuot, we have 7 weeks, and we count each of those days between Passover and Shavuot. Lag BaOmer is, if you know Hebrew at all, Lag is Lamed and Gimel. Lamed represents the number 30, and Gimel represents the number 3. So Lag BaOmer is the 33rd day of that counting between Passover and Shavuot. It's kind of a little bit further than middle, but there are mystical properties of that number of 33, and it's a great day for bonfires. During the Omer, people will go into a minor period of mourning, so there won't be weddings, and people won't cut their hair. They'll take on certain mourning customs, and on Lag BaOmer, that's kind of the break from the mourning customs. You go cut your hair, you go have a big bonfire, or go to a party, or go to a concert, or have your wedding or bar mitzvah. So Lag BaOmer is a day of celebration amidst the mourning. Shavuot is in the month of Sivan, and Shavuot we see often as the giving of the 10 Commandments. Tammuz there's a minor fast day in Tammuz. Av has Tisha B'Av, which is our saddest day of the Jewish calendar, kind of commemorating all of the tragedies that we've gone through, especially the destruction of our two temples. And then we go into Elul, which is basically a spiritual preparation for Tishrei, where the year starts once more on Rosh Hashanah. I just spit a lot of information out there, but questions about how this calendar works?
So is that just representing that it kind of flexes between those 2 points?
Right, exactly. So in some years, Av will be mostly July, and some years it'll be mostly August. Right, last year Tishrei was all September. This year it'll be, I'm trying to figure out when Rosh Hashanah is this year, but I think it'll be, do I have it in front of me? This is the wrong calendar for that. Let's see. There we go. Rosh Hashanah this year is going to be, or next year, is going to start on September 26th. So end of September, early October. I know it is so much, right? Which is why it's a lot easier to look at a visual calendar. So next time you come to the synagogue or come to a synagogue, pick up a Jewish calendar, and it's much easier to look at when you're seeing it visually. You can download it on your phone or look at a calendar online, but I find that visually it's just so much easier to look at, because then you can see exactly when each of the holidays are going to be. So a great way to sort through these holidays. We're going to look at the holidays in a few different ways. If you've got a textbook, or if you've got that chapter that I sent out online, you might want to flip in between pages 54 through 57 to kind of keep up, but hopefully we can explain it well enough that you don't need to. But if you want to keep along in the chapter, you can flip between those pages and make notes. But if we start out, or a good way to sort in between these holidays, or the main holidays that we're going to talk about today, are our people's story, which I would also call agricultural holidays, moments to pause, which are kind of reflective holidays, and holidays of history, which is Hanukkah and Purim and Tisha B'Av. We'll learn more about each of these. So our people's story and pilgrimage festivals, these are our agricultural festivals as well. Moments of personal reflection, which are moments of personal reflection are these three. And then holidays of history, which are either late or post-biblical, are Hanukkah, Purim, and Tisha B'Av. I love this idea that the Jewish calendar is an experiential curriculum for teaching the most important stories, ideas, and values of the Jewish people. With each holiday, we don't just remember, we do actions that help us re-experience it. So the Shalosh Regalim, the 3 holidays, in biblical times, we would make 3 pilgrimages to the temple in Jerusalem. We would make pilgrimage on Pesach, which is Passover, so the spring harvest, like Emma was saying, agricultural. Shavuot, which is the summer harvest, and then Sukkot, which is the fall harvest. And so we would bring all of our sacrifices and all of our new harvest to the temple to celebrate. For the next few holidays, I'm going to introduce some verses. We've got a question. Food is important to celebrate, right? Especially if it means survival. So if you look in Torah, when at the places where it says God's going to rain down on you, that's a good thing. We like rain. When it says that God's going to withhold rain, that's not a good thing because it means we're not getting our food, right? So food is not just celebratory in that it tastes good, but also it really stands for life, right? So I'm going to pause as we read each of these excerpts, and I'm going to challenge you to ask the question of why do we celebrate? And according to this text, what do we do to celebrate? And I've given you hints by bolding the things that are important. So why do we celebrate this holiday, and what do we do? So this first holiday is Passover. And once you see the answer, you can shout it out.
Well, we celebrate Passover to celebrate the passing over of the Israelites in Egypt during the plagues.
Yes, right, according to this text, absolutely. Absolutely. On that 10th plague, God passed over our houses.
The killing of the firstborn, right?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And there will be, Shavuot also will acknowledge that as well.
And what we do is we don't eat leavened bread.
Fantastic. We don't eat leavened bread.
Oh, you actually remove any temptation at all.
Mm-hmm. Right. Not just don't eat leavened bread, but don't have it in your houses at all. And there's one other thing that's kind of hidden in there, but it's still in the bold. It is, and when your children ask you, what do you mean by this? You shall say it is a Passover sacrifice to God. So Passover theoretically is supposed to be a kid's holiday. It's supposed to be a holiday that the kids enjoy and have a great time at because this is for them to learn more about their Judaism.
I suppose it's also symbolically because in a way, you're protecting, the whole thing is if children were protected. So symbolically, why are you depriving me of the bread? And the parents like, this is for your own good, to be, being cruel to be kind, kind of.
Huh.
So, I'm guessing kids would ask because they want the bread, the leavened bread.
Right. Like, it's a weird concept to not eat bread for 8 days. So why don't we eat bread? Let me tell you the story, and let's have a fun family meal with lots of food to tell you that story. Absolutely. So it's not just, in modern days, it's not just a commemoration of that passing over of the houses, but really a commemoration of the Exodus in general. And today, we celebrate with a symbolic reenactment of the Passover Seder. We clean our houses of chametz, of leavened products, and we don't eat leavened bread that comes from the grains that are mentioned in Torah. So those grains are going to be, they're going to be wheat, barley, rye, spelt, and oats. So we don't eat wheat, barley, rye, spelt, and oats. And then there are a whole lot of other kosher laws that come around along with that, but that's kind of the main 5 that we don't eat on Passover. Historically, Ashkenazi Jews have added a lot more to that, but now more and more are starting to go back to just those basic 5. Is it also not tradition to hide certain bread for the kids to find? Oh, I love that question. There are actually 2 answers to that question. There are 2 things you might be referring to, Bryson. One is the night before Passover, when we're getting rid of all of the bread in our house. When we're doing, basically it's spring cleaning time, when we're doing our deep spring cleaning, it is traditional to leave a little crumb or leave a tortilla or something. And then the next morning, the whole family goes around the house and tries to find that extra tortilla, and then they burn it. Take it outside, set it on fire, say some nice words, just as a symbol that, and they say the words that this is our last bit of bread that we have in the house. They say this in Aramaic. So this is our last bit of bread. If we have any other bread, it's nullified. We looked hard enough already. So that's our last little bit that we say before Passover actually starts. And the second thing that you might be referring to, Bryson, is that during the Passover Seder, we have matzah on the table, which is really flat bread that tastes like an inferior cracker. But some people like it. But we have matzah on the table that's called the afikomen, and it's our symbol for dessert time. And so once it's time to have the afikomen, the adults traditionally will hide the afikomen for the kids, and the kids will go around the house and try looking for it. So once the kids find the afikomen, it's time for dessert. There we go, afikomen. Exactly. All right, so we got Passover. Our next one is Shavuot. And this is a verse from Leviticus, our Shavuot origin story. So why do we celebrate Shavuot, and what do we do according to Torah? So I can think of 3 different things that we do. Actually, it doesn't really say why, does it? Let's see, it's about giving thanks. I like that. Let's see.
One's a sin offering, so I think it's about redemption as well.
Some of it's redemption. Jade, where do you get the thanks from? I think you're right, but I'm trying to find where in the text. I think part of it is agriculturally, for sure. So what do we do according to this text? Oops. No.
I mean, I don't know. It looks like sacrifice part of your harvest.
Yeah, sacrifice part of your harvest. Not just part of your harvest, but you sacrifice your, and I don't think this is here, but you sacrifice traditionally the best part, the first part of your harvest and the best part of the first part of your harvest. And not just the best part of the first part of your harvest, but the best part of the first part, or the best part of your firstborn animals. Right? So this is one of those holidays, along with Passover, but mentioned in a different section, where you do a lot of sacrifice, both grain sacrifice and animal sacrifice. We do not still do this today, so good to know, just to repeat out there for anybody who had any doubts, we do not sacrifice animals in Judaism still today. What we do instead is we pray at certain times of the day. So on holidays and on weekdays and on Shabbat, we have prayer services at different parts of the day to represent the different sacrifices that we need brought during the day. The morning sacrifice, the afternoon sacrifice, the additional sacrifice that we would do in holidays, and then the evening. In the evenings, they kind of just let things boil overnight, but we have an evening prayer as well. So we do these prayers, we do several rituals. But Shavuot is it's interesting. It's a harvest festival, giving thanks for the agriculture that we have. But beyond that, there's not a whole lot more. There's an idea that because we're bringing the first fruits, it might be a reliving of, again, that moment where God took the firstborn, right? That thank goodness God didn't take our firstborn, but we're happy to give the first of our fruits to God. Love that. They're sacrificing so much of the good that has been given, like saying, look how good you've been to so much. This is us showing we're thankful by giving it back. I love that. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that was the logical reason of why to do sacrifice back in biblical times. So now on Shavuot, we commemorate the revelation at Sinai. We think about the time between Passover and Shavuot as the time between when the Israelites left Egypt and the time when the Israelites got to Mount Sinai. So we're counting out those days. I want to also acknowledge a couple of other things we saw in these in here. One, we had the counting, right? The counting of days. You shall count off 7 weeks. One is, it said, it shall be a celebration for you. So we make sure we have nice meals on Shavuot. And then one is no work. We'll get back to the no work business in a bit. On Shavuot today, we commemorate that revelation at Sinai. We do a lot of learning all night long to commemorate that. So traditionally, although we don't do this at Agudath Achim yet, we will learn all night long and then end it all. You start it with an evening service, learn all night long, and then end it with the morning service. At Agudath Achim, we just stay up late for a few hours later than normal and do our learning then. But reenacting that revelation at Sinai, where we spent so much time learning Torah directly from God. We read the book of Ruth, and we also eat dairy desserts.
Rabbi, are we not overwhelmingly lactose intolerant in this community? How did the dairy desserts get into tradition?
So I have heard lots of people try to teach why the dairy desserts came into tradition. We don't really have a concrete answer. The prettiest explanation I've been given is that Torah is life-giving, like milk is life-giving, and so we eat dairy desserts. But I don't know much about the history other than that. It's very recent. It's a recent Ashkenazi thing. But I'll look into it because that's a good question. But yeah, I do think it's ridiculous that we eat cheesecake when so many of us are lactose intolerant.
Thank goodness for vegan cheese.
Thank goodness for vegan cheese. And there's actually vegan cheesecake out there that's not bad.
Oh.
Yeah. All right. One more bit of text. I think this is the last bit of text I put in here. Maybe not. Actually, no, I don't think it is. But this is our Sukkot Origins story. So, or one of the Sukkot origin stories. Why do we celebrate? And what do we do to celebrate? Same two questions.
Well, the why seems like in order that future generations may know that I made the Israelite people live in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I feel like booths has to have a particular meaning here, like huts, right?
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny because there are two different explanations of that. One is this idea that the Israelites lived in huts that they could carry around with them while they were traveling through the desert. And one is that we think of the Sukkah as a reenactment of God's protecting presence. So if you read Torah, there's God leads the people Israel in a pillar of smoke and fire, and God kind of surrounds the people Israel and keeps them safe throughout. And so the rabbinic understanding is that when we're thinking about booths, we're thinking of that shade of God's presence around us.
And the how we celebrate, it seems like you bring offerings and gifts into your booth, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
The burning is what, because I can burn nearly everything. A libation, I guess if they're alcoholic, you could get away with burning it.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if that's just the way it's translated, or if it did mean try to burn the wine, like specifically wine or something, that they had that alcohol was alcoholic.
Well, so burnt offerings are very specific. Burnt offerings are burnt animals. Meal offerings are tend to be like burnt flour. Sacrifices are also animals, and libations are kind of just pouring stuff.
All right, so.
But also drinking. But also good to know that rabbinically, that in Mishnaic times, Sukkot was like this rowdy holiday where people celebrated with carnivals and festivals and musical instruments and dancing. The Talmud explains these fantastic parties that used to happen during Sukkot. So we live in booths. We also take the product of hadar trees and branches of palm trees and boughs of leafy trees and willows, and you shall rejoice before God 7 days. So the rejoicing is the partying. But there's also the issue of all the different trees, which we'll get to. Oh, I forgot about this. We will watch this. So, do we get there? We do. Okay, so the 4 species, these four plants, we, in today's world, take them together and shake them in a certain pattern. So these species are the palm branch, willow branch, myrtle branch, and an etrog, which is a big lemon, sometimes yellow, sometimes green. And we shake them on all different sides around us, and there's lots of symbolism there. But that's the one thing that that we still do that's still kind of in there. Other than the building the booths, we don't give the animal sacrifices anymore, but we do shake some palms. So I like this video a lot about for telling us what a sukkah is, what is this hut, how do we build it, why do we build it. And so let me know if you can't hear it, but I'm gonna hopefully not gonna put it on widescreen, but hopefully you can hear this. If not, just let me know.
You can call me woke. I call Sukkot the Jewish picnic holiday because you get to eat your meals outside, and you build a hut to provide shade for you, your family, and your guests. And you do it for a week. Oh, and you wave around a trident made out of plants and a weird lemon thing. Wait, stop, back up. How did we end up with a holiday like this? God tells Moses to tell the Israelites about the 3 awesome parties, aka harvest festivals, they will have once they reach the promised land. Passover, Shavuot, and the fall harvest, the festival of booths, Sukkot. Why? Because, as God tells Moses, the people of Israel shall dwell in booths. Now here, a booth doesn't mean a phone booth or a photo booth. It means a festival picnic hut. And we're supposed to live and eat in our festival picnic huts, our Sukkot. You're supposed to sleep in it, study Torah in it, hang out in it. In some places you can sukkah hop, enjoying food and l'chaim all night long. The sukkah is a symbol not only of the harvest, when ancient crop harvesters spent nights in the field huts, but also of the clouds of glory God created to protect the Israelites wandering in the desert. So, we make our Sukkot today comfy, magical places. Some families hang gourds, strings of popcorn, paper chains, drawings, disco balls. The one thing that ties them all together is tzach, the plant matter on top. 4 out of 5 rabbis agree that tzach is the most beautiful word in the Hebrew language. And there's more. God said on the first day of this festival, take the fruit of good trees, branches of palm trees, boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook, and party it up before God. That's all the Torah has to say on the subject of the harvest holiday, but fortunately the Talmud explains what to do with these 4 species. The 3 green species we bind together into a green lulav. Meanwhile, the fruit of the good tree is identified as an etrog. An etrog has an amazing fresh citrus smell, but if you chop it open, there's like 0 fruit inside. Don't bother trying to eat it. You'll just be pissed off. You hold the etrog to the hilt of the lulav. You shake it around and boom! You've fulfilled a mitzvah. Some mitzvot are so easy. The Kabbalist Arizal said we shake it in 6 directions to draw energy to the heart, each direction symbolizing a mystical sphere. Lulav. So cool, but what's the meaning? Well, like so many Jewish traditions, there are multiple answers. Some say the 4 species symbolize parts of the body. Others say different types of people. Me, I just enjoy the feeling, the sound, and the smell. Sukkot has a special synagogue service with extra prayers, songs, and a lulav parade. And no Jewish holiday would be complete without a festive meal, in this case, in a sukkah. It'd take about 7 days just to explain the rules about building Sukkot, but that said, I've seen Sukkot on balconies, I've seen a skylight covered with schach, and a clever sukkah-mobile. In Detroit, there's a shipping crate sukkah. In Venice, there's a boat sukkah. In Portland, a sukkah on a bike trailer, of course, and others have gone way out of the box. But they all have schach on top. From palm fronds to pine needles, the schach has some deep, deep symbolism to it. It must be sparse enough to allow rain in and to let you see the stars. And yet it must be thick enough to provide more shade than sun. One way to understand it, God's light pours into this world, filling it with life. But we can't look straight at the light. It's blinding. It takes clouds, or schach, to filter this light into a form we can appreciate, understand, and handle. Maybe the idea is that in our world, we can't see God, but we can see God's shadow in acts of kindness, in acts of justice, in each other's faces.
A quick overview, but we heard some of the midrash, the interpretation that comes along with the holiday. Oops. So again, these are the laws of the sukkah that we build. We have at least 2.5 walls made of any reasonably sturdy material. We've got a roof of detached plant material, so we use bamboo from Barbara Joseph's garden here in our sukkah here. And it's got to be large enough to fit at least one person and a table, although if you'd like to host people, it should be a little bit bigger than that. Questions about Sukkot or about the harvest festivals before we go on? Great. One of the confusing things about the festivals, the Jewish festivals, is timing. So Passover and Sukkot are technically 7-day festivals, or eight-day festivals, but I'll back up. Passover and Sukkot are traditionally 7-day festivals. So we'll start at the bottom with with how Israel celebrates. So on Passover and Sukkot, the first day and the 7th day are holy enough that we don't traditionally do work. We have big services and we don't traditionally do any work on those days. We will learn what no work means next week when we talk about Shabbat, but traditionally no work on the first and 7 days of Passover and Sukkot. And days 2 through 6 we call Chol HaMoed, which are also part of the holiday. We also don't eat bread, or we also hang out in the hut, but we can also go to work because it would be a lot to take off 7 days of work. In the diaspora, there's all this wonderful talk about the moon and how back in the day a messenger would have to go from Jerusalem to outside of the Jerusalem, and it would take a while to tell whether the holiday had started. So we add in extra days outside of Israel. So outside of Israel, days 1 and 2 are holy days where we don't work and where we have lots of services. Days 3 through 6 are Chol HaMoed, and days 7 and 8 are the holiday. Rosh Hashanah is 2 days everywhere. Yom Kippur is 1 day everywhere. Hanukkah is 8 days everywhere. And Purim and Tisha B'Av are 1 day everywhere, except that Purim is on a different date depending on whether you're in a walled city or not a walled city. So a lot of people in Israel will travel between, if they want to celebrate Purim twice, they'll travel between Jerusalem, which is walled, and Tel Aviv, which is not walled, and celebrate twice. So Shabbat and the High Holy Days, we have full classes on those, but this quote from Arthur Schnabel is beautiful, I think. The notes I handle no better than many pianists, but the pauses between the notes, that is where the art resides. So Shabbat is our weekly reset button, and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are our times to really reflect on what we've done the past year and how we want to live our lives in the year to come. Our holidays of history are Hanukkah, Purim, and Tisha B'Av. We don't have to read all of this now, but Hanukkah is really a recent holiday. So Second Maccabees talks about it, but Second Maccabees is not in the Tanakh. It's actually written in Greek. But in Second Maccabees, there's this idea that Hanukkah is a celebration of, or a second celebration of Sukkot. The people, the Maccabees, the Jewish people, missed Sukkot because they weren't allowed to worship. They weren't allowed to build their huts. They weren't allowed to worship in their temple or bring sacrifices. And so once they were able to, on the 25th day of Kislev, once they finally got their sanctuary back, they were able to celebrate Sukkot again, which is why it's 8 days, because Sukkot is a celebration of 7 days plus 1. The plus 1 is Simchat Torah Shmini Atzeret, so it's 7 days plus 1. So the 8 days is parallel to the 8 days of Sukkot because it's that celebration of Sukkot yet again. In the Babylonian Talmud, we get the story that we might have heard from as kids, right? That the Greeks came into the temple and destroyed everything. And as we were trying to relight the menorah and also a lot of different a lot of different things that needed to be lit in the temple. There was only one cruse of oil, and it lasted for 8 days. It was a miracle, and so they appointed these days as a festival. Elsewhere, I always like to teach on Hanukkah, there's a story about Adam, who in his first year that he was on earth, he noticed the days were getting shorter and shorter, that the dark was coming in more and more, and he was terrified that that was his punishment, that the world was just going to be forever dark because of eating that fruit. But then the days started getting longer and longer again, and so he rejoiced and had a festival. And it also mentions in Talmud that he wasn't the only one, or that the Jewish people weren't the only ones to establish a festival on that day, that the Greeks and the Romans did also. The super abbreviated, probably not true story of Purim. Purim is kind of about everything going upside down. King Khashvan of Persia needs a new queen. Esther is selected in a beauty pageant. Haman, the king's evil advisor, develops a personal grudge against the Jews because Mordechai, Esther's uncle, won't bow to him. King Ahasuerus signs an order of genocide against the Jews of Persia. Esther, with the encouragement of Mordechai, risks her life to save her people. And it doesn't mention here that, but Esther had not mentioned to the king yet that she was Jewish, but she mentions to the king that she's Jewish. So Haman winds up executed instead of the Jews. Much rejoicing ensues, and what this leaves out also is that a lot of people are killed at the end of the book of Esther. The 4 mitzvot that we perform to celebrate is, one, we read the Megillah, we read the book of Esther, we retell the story, and Purim is coming up in a little over a month. So if you would like to help us read the Megillah, either in English or in Hebrew or in whatever other language you speak, in song, dance, or just reading out of the book, let me know, and you're welcome to read a chapter. So we read the Megillah, we retell the story. We have an over-the-top celebration. In Jewish communities around the world, Purim means a lot of drinking. That's not so much the case here, but in a lot of places it's a drinking holiday. We give gifts to friends, mishloach manot, and we give extra charity, which is matanot le'evyonim. Tisha B'Av, then, is really the opposite of Purim. Even though it's similarly a historical commemoration of a late biblical happening, it's the opposite tone. So it's a commemoration of really all the tragedies of Jewish history. There are 3 weeks of mourning that come before Tisha B'Av, 9 days of more intensive mourning. On Tisha B'Av, we chant Lamentations, which is Eicha, and we fast all day on Tisha B'Av. It's a really long fast day because it's right in the middle of summer or late summer. And there's this idea that the Messiah is to be born on Tisha B'Av because on that day of destruction is when redemption will happen. And really, historically, those days of destruction, the day of the destruction of the temple, of the second temple, really changed Judaism dramatically. I always like talking about this idea of Jewish community, of modern Jewish community coming out of the destruction of the temple, because when the temple was destroyed, we no longer had the hierarchy of the priesthood, and we had to figure out, how do we practice Jewish community in our homes and in synagogues, in local community? How do we transition from sacrifice to ritual or to personal prayer? So it really changed the way that we do Jewish. And so while it was devastating, the holiday of Tisha B'Av towards the end of the day kind of picks up in mood with this idea that there is hope, there is light at the end of the tunnel. So questions about all of that stuff about holidays, or insights?
With the fast, is it a strict fast in the sense like, no water as well?
Yes, so both Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur are no food, no water. On on Tisha B'Av, on both holidays, there's also other things that we fast from. So we don't wear leather shoes. Um, we don't wear leather shoes. We don't bathe. We we don't have sex. Um, we don't anoint ourselves like with lotions or perfumes or put on makeup. So there are a couple of other things that we do just to acknowledge that it's a day of mourning, right? That it's not just a day where, oh, I've eaten too much lately, I'm just gonna stop for 25 hours, right? That it's really a day of mourning. And it's also really important to point out too that for those for whom it's not comfortable to fast, or for those, it's always going to be uncomfortable. But for those for whom it's not healthy to fast, even the Talmud says that they absolutely should not fast. So even if there's any doubt that someone should not be fasting, then they should not be fasting.
I have a peripherally related question, not to fasting, but to celebration in general. So a lot of these holidays seem to rely a lot on community, like the Passover, Seders, and Purim, and kind of celebrating in community. I know this is going to sound weird because I live in New York City and there's a ton of synagogues and a huge Jewish community in New York City, but my personal life does not have a whole lot of, I have a lot of Jewish friends who have Jewish families, but I don't personally have a huge Jewish community. Like my family isn't local. I don't currently belong to a synagogue. So like things like Yom Kippur, I can do that on my own. I can stream a service. I can fast on my own. But do you have like, I don't know, like like tips for like, I don't know, like celebrating Passover when you don't have a family who does a Seder who's local? Like I live with my significant other who isn't Jewish, and I'm not a member of a synagogue, or like Purim or stuff like that. What's your take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of different things. One is even if you live on your own, you can always find community. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about now, especially after the pandemic, that most communities are now online as well as in person. Um, and so there will probably be an online Seder that you can be a part of. I think another thing too, especially living in New York, is that you can find, and I can help you find this, you can find Shabbat dinners or Passover Seders to go to just with families. You'd reach out to a synagogue, to a local synagogue, even if you're not a member, and say, hey, I don't have anybody to do Seder with. Can you please refer me? Is there a family that might want to have Seder with me? And the answer should be yes. If not, you shouldn't. If not, you ask the wrong community. You can ask a different community. And so that's one thing. But if you really want to celebrate on your own, then there are lots of resources to have your own Seder. Like I have an at-home Seder slide that you can use. There's also, I can also send you, the Kitchen is a community in San Francisco. They have a Seder card game that's fun for everyone, whether they're Jewish or not Jewish. That's what I've been using the past few years at home is the Seder card game. So number one, you can always find community, but number two, there are definitely resources. So if you're interested in really specific resources about how to celebrate specific holidays, then let me know which holidays or which parts of the year you're interested in, and then we can go from there, and I can show you some places. But also know that you can always log into our stuff too.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. And My Jewish Learning has a lot of resources also. That's a good place to look always.
Yeah, no, it's been a great resource. I've been spending some time on that one.
Yeah. Great. I'm going to ask one more question, but what I would love to show you, hopefully the website is working. It wasn't a couple minutes ago, but what I'd love to show you is the website for 929. So starting this coming week, Is it up? It's up in Hebrew. Let's go to English. It may not be up yet. Okay. Starting this coming week, Sunday through Thursday, every week for the next couple years, we're going to be starting to, at the Agudath Achim community and all over the world, read the Tanakh, read the Hebrew Bible, one chapter at a time. Every day, Sunday through Thursday, 5 chapters a week, we're going to be reading together. And so in our community, we're acknowledging this by, after Shabbat lunch, we're having a conversation about the week's readings. And every day that I'm in the office and available, I'll be learning at 11 o'clock a.m., both on Zoom and in person. And I am sure that there are lots of other people in the community that you can partner with to learn as well. So if you're interested in joining in our learning for 929, there's not much you have to do. You can read 1 chapter a day. You can check our schedule to see what the chapters are. And if you want to do it kind of on your own time and not in a specific community, you can go to 929.org.il, and I'm going to put that in the chat. It may pop up in Hebrew. If it pops up in Hebrew, you click, there's a little button on the top corner that says EN, and you click that, and then it'll be in English. So, or you can Google 929 English, but please join our learning. Even if it's from a distance, we'd love to have you, and you can drop in, you can do the whole thing, any part of it. We'd love to have you. My last question today is, I'd love to know from a few of you if there is a holiday that you're really excited to celebrate this year. Even if you've already celebrated it before, what's a holiday that you're looking forward to?
I want to burn a tortilla.
You want to burn a tortilla. Fantastic.
I just thought that was
So you're
so
excited
cool.
for the day before Passover.
Yeah, I'm just trying to work out how to get the cat to be the one to, because we don't have any kids, and I think the only child in Matt's family is too young for this. So I'm trying to work out how to make a cat want to find a tortilla.
I bet you could have the cat. I bet the cat could find a tortilla.
She probably try to eat it. She tries to eat everything.
Yeah,
But
there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. So the cat will find the tortilla. Fantastic.
When we'll burn it, we'll have to quickly yank it away.
Fantastic. And we're having, at Agudath Achim, we're having a challah bake-off the week before Passover so that we can get all of our challah out of the house. And I think Curtis said that, I think you said that you bake challah, so hopefully your challah can be part of the bake-off. Jade's excited for Sukkot and Purim.
I want to attend a Passover Seder in person and attend a high holiday service in person this year.
Amazing.
Those are my goals.
Amazing. And if you'd like, I'm happy to talk with you on the phone or on Zoom about different communities in New York, because there are so many, and it's kind of hard to tell which ones to look out for.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Bryson's excited for Passover Seder. I'm excited for a Passover Seder because I haven't actually experienced a Passover Seder at Agudath Achim yet. It's my 3rd year here, and the first 2 have been foodless or community foodless because of the pandemic. So I'm really excited for that. Well, thank you all for learning with me today. And I'm looking forward to next week to talking about Shabbat. We're going to be talking about stuff that we do on Shabbat and stuff that we traditionally don't do on Shabbat, and where we stand in all of those different practices, what we might push ourselves to do on Shabbat or to not do on Shabbat, and see where we can go from there. So have a wonderful evening. Lovely seeing you all.